Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the next episode of DINCast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Paul Maltby, who's the Chief Digital Officer at the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And we're going to be having a chat about digital transformation and how you can make it a success. So, Paul, welcome along.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me across here.
Yeah, well, it's great to sort of be chatting to somebody so I suppose embedded within the digital space within government. And I think when we sort of chatted previously before, we were interested in looking at how local government has evolved and its digital transformation. And I'd like to sort of explore with you what lessons there might be for social housing providers. But for those people who don't know you or haven't seen you sort of present before, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. And so, yes, I'm Chief Digital Officer in Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government, one of the big Whitehall departments. So my day job, if you like, is to make sure the technology lights stay on. So the laptops and the printers and the cyber security and all of that, to make sure that when we do services, so things recently like the energy performance certificate services, a thing that's gone live, that we do that in modern, easy to use, modular ways. But also, and I think this is a really interesting thing about MHCLGs with the acronym, is making policy fit for the internet age and sort of updating what policy departments mean for a digital era. And so I've been working in government for 16 years now, blimey. And I started off I worked in the PM strategy unit in the Cabinet Office back in the day. And I suppose my journey, I've always been a government reformer by sort of inclination as well as by career. And I suppose over the years, I've just wanted to get I'm interested in the nuts and bolts of things, and sort of started off with sort of highfalutin big policy work, which is fascinating and I still love. But it was really that sort of frustration of wanting to, roll my sleeves up and get stuck in with, fixing the bolts and the engineering, if you like, of government. And then probably halfway through my government career, I had my first actual engineering team when I ran this thing called the Government Innovation Group and looked after data.govt.uk. And that was my first digital engineering team. And it was like a proper revelation. It was like, wow, we can do this, moves things on enormously. And then since then, looked after things around data science in government, worked in government digital service for a little bit. Worked in a local authority in Leicestershire for a couple of years, was it? Now on this, my first sort of, I suppose, senior leadership role in the digital side in a big Whitehall department.
And I suppose, since the start of the year with sort of the pandemic and things like that, I just wondered how your thinking has evolved from I suppose, a digital space.
Yeah.
As to, well, actually, is this acting as an accelerator for public organisations to, move their digital transformation forward?
I mean, I think it is. I think we're probably not alone on that, and it's one of those things, isn't it? What a year this has been, and obviously not anything that anyone would have ever wished upon the world. But one of the silver linings to the clouds that we're under is that it has sort of provoked that change, and it feels like years worth of change, sometimes in just a few months and years. And of course, we've all been working at home, and thank goodness we'd made the tech investment within the department. So people's laptops and video calls and all of that malarkey just worked. And I think it really got people's heads around the fact that this wasn't just a thing that sat on your machine didn't just sit on your desk as you printed out papers and went to meetings, but actually it could enable a different type of working. And actually, to their great credit, my colleagues, and particularly senior colleagues, permanent secretary and ministers in the department, have really sort of really used it as a lever to try and make some bigger, in some ways more profound change. So in a way, I'm very grateful as that being an upside. It's so sad that it's on the back of what's been a really tough year.
And so part of your sort of focus has been on supporting local authorities on their sort of digital transformation journeys then. Could you say a bit more about that in terms of what you've experienced as the main challenges and how you've helped them overcome them?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the teams to look after is we call it the local digital collaboration unit, and the idea is really that there was some real reformers in the digital side in local government, some really pioneering folks there well before me and my team sort of entered in onto this space. But by and large, the sector is still quite beholden with legacy technology, a leadership group that perhaps doesn't always understand what the latest in digital service thinking, as well as the technologies, can always offer. And of course, other difficulties around budgets and the things that we're all well aware of over the last decade or so. And so what we want to do is work with a bunch of those reformers, with councils like this is where the collaboration bit comes in, and help them move to a modern, user-centered, more modular software and service mindset, and help make some of those reforms really as a, for me, it's the different sort of relationship between central government and local government, you know, as a boost for what they're doing already, and to show people what good looks like, because it's hard making that change. You know, I've been in a council for a couple of years. It's hard making that change on your own. I mean, it's amazing that some do it. But I was really thinking, what can we in central government do to boost that story and help them get, like, you know, good modern software that others can reuse and adapt for their own purposes.
And how hard has it been to get them to collaborate and actually sort of come together? Because there's a lot of individual local authorities. How have you managed to coalesce them so that there's no duplication of effort?
Well, it's no surprise to anyone. This is one of the hard things. And I think what I've always had in my mind is there's a sort of balance, because, you know, it's true of, I'm sure any sizable organization, I don't even think it's a public sector thing, but, you know, like, organizations weirdly have their rivals and want to be the first that do things. And so in a way, getting people to reuse and just adopt things that others have done already is sometimes quite hard in our world. But the other side of that balance is on the digital and technology world. Of course, like, we still borrow, reuse as a matter of course, right? I mean, it's like, you just go and you don't start writing your code from scratch, or you don't start doing your design patterns from scratch. You go and learn stand on the shoulders of people that have been there already. And so this is sort of these two sides of the story we knew we were going to have to balance. But I think that, you know, people know in councils that their services that they use day in, day out could be better. You know, some of those are pretty shocking still. There's some amazing examples, but some are not great. So there's an appetite that I think we've managed to tap into. And so far, you know, we've had, like, you know, well over 100 local authorities working with other local authorities on services through the local digital fund and other things that we've done. It's been pretty amazing.
And which ones would you sort of, you know, say, actually, I'm really quite proud of what these guys have achieved over here? Is there any in particular you'd want to share?
Well, one that's, we just finished the consultation on the government's planning reforms, and that is one that I think is really interesting. We started off with a couple of councils coming to us and saying, look, do you realise we've got, like, even for the basic planning applications that come into the council, we've got like 50% of them are full of errors. And then we've got these expensive planning officers who have to phone people up and go, you haven't got the right documents, or that's not within the rules, and all those sorts of things. So we started on that and worked with about a dozen local authorities for different parts of it. And there's two things: a back office planning service and a thing that we've been calling reducing invalid planning applications, where it's sort of a front end and a back end to the planning application system. But it's now become really cemented as a mainstay of the government's planning reforms. And we're at the point of going into private beta probably spring or so. So, you know, well into the alphaing of those digital services, and some really amazing work from the councils, for the digital agencies that we've booked. My teams are more stewards of this and involved in some of the data things and some of the collective standards. So it's not really work that's happened in my team per se, like the building work, it's happened out there. But I think, you know, some very interesting things for how we can see the planning system reform and change. And I hope a bit of a sign of what's good stuff to come.
And I would imagine that one of those sort of aspects that sort of governs whether digital programs will succeed is the quality of the data that organizations sort of have to work with. And I just wonder what your thoughts would be about how we can get leaders to value or invest in quality data more than where we currently are.
It's one of the hardest things, isn't it? And I had that background over the last decade or so of working with closely with data teams, and some amazing, like, cutting edge data scientists working in and around government as well. But when we started this local digital program, we were like, how do we make the basic, boring infrastructure stuff like important? Because everyone wants that AI for this and the, you know, blockchain for that or whatever it may be. And it's just like, yeah, but you've got to get your data sorted. You've got to get your basic digital technology infrastructure. So in the local digital program, we thought quite purposefully about this, and with our minister, so it was Rishi Sunak actually at the time local government minister, when he was local government minister, and we had a thing like we did hashtag fix the plumbing, and we sort of just went over and over. We used it all of the time, and it was an effort really to try and counter that innate balance where people want the shiny things, but the sort of hard grind of just doing the basic systems is always a slightly harder sell for not just politicians, of course, but others that perhaps not so embedded in this world. So we tried to do that, but in reality, you've got to keep these things in balance, haven't you? You've got to be able to show that a digital system can make a difference, makes people's workflow better and saves money and does all the boring things that just is why the digital revolution has happened. And in the course of that, making sure we've got the thinking to go, you know what, actually, in the end, we're going to need a standard way to describe a planning decision in that the planning description just been talking about. We need a way to bring local plans, the design patterns of what you're allowed to do in local areas at the minute are just big collections of prose, and we need to be able to make those digitally consumable, right? So it's all part of the story, but it's a daily challenge. I do sympathize with many others in our position.
Yeah, I bet, Paul. I mean, I think one of the other things that's sort of a challenge is around our approach to failure. And we come across lots of organizations whose systems, processes, measures are designed to sort of rule out any potential for sort of failure. Yet that's where our learning and innovation actually sort of comes from. I just wonder what your thoughts were around how you can build that into experimentation and digital transformation programs in a safe way.
It is difficult, again, because it's in my experience, actually, ministers are some of the best at understanding that. I think, when I used to work with Francis Maude back in the Cabinet Office some years ago, he was always said, like, ministers aren't risk averse, they're surprise averse. Don't just tell us what's going on, but we're some of us are in the riskiest profession that's going. And I think that sort of stuck in my head back in the day. Now, that said, it's obviously sometimes a challenge. Those who's working with public money be able to explain that we're using taxpayers' money properly and not, and not foolishly. I think explaining the digital process helps a lot. So explaining that we're going to go through we're not going to go straight out with the big bang tech solution. We're going to go through a discovery phase and then I'm going to alpha a number of different solutions here, and some of those won't be the right ones, and our process is designed to do that. In government, we have government digital services assessments which help us reinforce that good practice. So we can do that. It's like we're following the rules because we're going through these things and learning. But yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, going back to many years ago when Francis Maude said, I want a prize for like the best government failure. And what I mean is the person that most quickly realized that a thing needed to change, rather than going through the motions and only doing that several years later after a lot of money has been spent. I don't think that in the end happened for perhaps understandable reasons, but it certainly helps for senior leaders to understand that part of the process, explain clearly that we're expecting some things to work and for us to learn, and better for us to learn in real time by doing and having people use our software, by investigating these things rather than starting with an assumption of how people are going to work. And look, from where I'm sitting, I've got a long way to go, but in my department, that story of a more, a more outside-in approach, right? So we've got superb people in government and civil service, super brainy, super able to kind of do things. It's a pleasure to work with colleagues. But what we don't always do is that outside-in work to go, is our assumption about how this is going to pan out, is that borne by the reality? So let's try, learn and change and get that cycle working quicker. But yeah, it's a challenge for all of us, I think.
Absolutely. And COVID is, as we've said, is going to change the way people look at services and also the experiences that they would expect to receive, because some of the big tech companies are investing massive amounts. They're streaming away in terms of how they've responded to this. So I just wonder, in your mind, what do you see as the next level for digital transformation in public services?
Well, I think there's a thing where like I said before, about there's a temptation where we think about AI and about like really sort of cutting edge technology, things like sensors, things like voice activated services, and there's going to be interesting things in some of those spaces for sure, right? But right now, there's quite a lot of basic things that don't work very well, like that are full system proprietary things that you can't get the data in and out of. Services that and not just the technology, but the contracts that we in public services like foist on our providers, as well as the providers foist on us. Sometimes it feels like we've got into this bad habit of just having these long-winded, like 5-10 year contracts for an immovable service. And so for me, there's still an awful lot of basic good service work that we need to do. But for me, as I said, one of the things I find interesting about this role in MHCLG is like, how do you do big policy work fit for the digital age? I think in government we haven't done them all by a long way. We've increasingly got our heads around this is how you do services that just work for people. They're cheaper, they're better, they're more modular, they're just more elegant to use. If elegant's probably the wrong word, but just simple to use, well designed. But the thing of how then do you think about planning reform so it's fit for the digital age? You don't just make your existing forms more consumable. That is something that I find fascinating. It's where my brain, my sort of older policy bit of my brain, if I can call it that, and my digital and data brain coincide. And I think it's nice to be able to use that in the department. So in a funny way, rather than saying data science and fancy technologies, though of course there's a bunch of stuff that's real in that space, as well as a bunch of hype. I would say it's the thing where doing good services, and you have that iterative cycle to be able to go, actually think about how we put data and standardized consumable data at the heart of something like a planning system, not thinking about the shiniest AI that you might be able to bring to things.
So when you're sort of looking at what to sort of I suppose showcase within MHCLG and things like that, what sort of sectors or organizations or leaders do you look for and think actually those guys are on the right path here?
Well, we were talking about local authorities a moment ago, and I think the thing for me is it's really easy to sit in central government, particularly in these sorts of jobs, and pontificate about like why isn't everyone more modernized, and why isn't the culture more modern and services better and all the rest of it. But you don't have to sit looking through other people's eyes for very long before you realize the struggle of bringing resources and knowledge and capability and ever-changing present demands right in front of people's faces in councils is a really understandable thing. So for me, when I see local council digital leads working on like whether it's planning or social housing, or whether it's on transport services or whatever it may be, that their social care, whatever their domain is that they're particularly helping on, when I see them really engaging their leadership teams, the people that they're accountable to, their users, in developing those services, that for me is where I get a lot of inspiration from. It's the great thing is, right, we work in practical stuff, right? That's what attracted me into this world. It's like people build things. We're a bit practically making things better. And I suspect for your audience in the same way, in your field, the same sorts of things are happening, and that's what I think gives a lot of us the energy to carry on through all those tough days as well.
So final question then, Paul. I mean, for those people watching or listening to this, what sort of one piece of advice or insight would you want to sort of share with them? Or they're about to embark upon a major digital transformation program, what would you want them to keep at the forefront of their mind?
My word. That's the hardest question. So look, I think a lot of people say, like, it's not really about the tech, it's about the culture, and it's about the people, and it's about the services, and it's about how people work as much as the technology that underpins that. And that is very clearly and obviously true. And the difference from doing a tech reform of whatever it may be to a bigger scale transformation in an organization. But I think the thing that I always kind of hold like dear is that even in those situations, like I was saying, that the really nice thing about the sorts of work that we do as digital transformation people is we make things, we do things, and I think the really nice thing for me is we used to have like a saying that used to be put on posters up on the wall in government digital service of show the thing, and it's the most useful thing, right? So describing what we do in abstract terms to people that perhaps don't really understand, it's a hard sell. And you know, we do it day in, day out, we try and get better at it, and we can be much better than we are and all of those things. But the best thing in the world is to go, look, let me, rather than try and explain it in the abstract, let me show you what we did. Like this, when you have a go yourself, senior leader or whoever it may be, when you see a real person using this service and understand what we've learned from that. And I think that grounding in the practical steps forward is the most important thing when we're doing a transformation of any size, because otherwise you can get lost in the culture and people and think crucial those that though and vital as those steps are, I would say.
Brilliant. A great way to finish, walking in your customers' shoes there, Paul. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed that. Lots of useful insights for listeners here, and I'm particularly pleased that we'll be hopefully working together in the new year with the CIO network again, and people can come and chat with you and I suppose get to understand a bit more about how government thinking can relate to the social housing space when it comes to all things digital. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ian. Really, real pleasure to be invited on, and I think it's really inspiring talking to you, and I know some of the folks that you work with. So if people want to see more things like MHCLG, digitalblog.gov.uk is a nice place to come and see some of the team, but we're out there on the internet, so please do come and say hello.